I was on remand for 14 months before anyone read the full forensic report. 14 months in a cell that was 8 feet by 6 with a window that faced a brick wall. Before a solicitor I had never met, obtained the original document and found the 3 paragraphs that had been removed. 3 paragraphs. That is the distance between 14 months of my life and none of it. 3 paragraphs in a report that had been in the Crown Prosecution Service's possession since the week of my arrest, sitting in a file that nobody on my defence team had been given access to in its complete form, because what had been disclosed, what my original barrister had been handed and had used to advise me and had presented at my first trial, was a summary. A 4-page summary of a 27-page report. A summary that described the forensic evidence as consistent with my guilt, and made no mention of the significant caveats the original author had included, the caveats that would have changed everything, the caveats that had been there all along in a document filed under a reference number that appeared in the disclosure index but whose full version had not been provided. I'm going to tell you what those paragraphs said. I'm going to tell you exactly why they mattered. And I am going to tell you what happened when a judge read them for the first time 14 months after they should have been in front of a jury. The charge was arson with intent to endanger life, my home, my children inside it. I had not set the fire. I'd been in the garden at the back of the house when I smelled smoke, and I had got my children out through the side gate, and I had called 999, and I had stood on the pavement watching my house burn while a neighbour held my youngest, and the fire service told me I was lucky to be alive. 3 weeks later, the police arrested me in my mother's kitchen and told me the forensic evidence suggested the fire had been set deliberately from inside the house, and that I was the only adult present. I told them I had not done it. I had said this to every person in every room I had been taken into since the arrest, and I will continue saying it here, not because saying it changes anything, but because it is true, and the truth of it is the point. My original barrister told me the forensic evidence was strong. She had reviewed the summary. She had assessed it as consistent with guilt. She had advised me that a guilty plea would likely result in a shorter sentence than a conviction at trial. I did not plead guilty. I was convicted at trial. I was sentenced to 7 years. I began serving the sentence on remand because bail had been denied at every hearing, the court having assessed the alleged risk as too high. Let me stop at 2 minutes and be precise about something. The forensic scientist who wrote the original report, a man I will call Dr. Marcus, had included in the body of that report 3 substantive paragraphs in which he had noted that the burn pattern in the hallway, while consistent with accelerant use, was also consistent with a specific type of rapid fire spread caused by a faulty electrical fitting of the type installed in properties of that era, and that had been the subject of a product safety notice. He had noted that a comprehensive examination of the electrical installation had not been conducted. He had noted that without such an examination, his conclusion that accelerant had been used could not be stated with certainty. He had concluded, in language that was precise and unambiguous, that the evidence was consistent with deliberate fire setting, but could not exclude an accidental cause, and that further investigation was recommended before a definitive conclusion could be reached. Further investigation was recommended. It was not conducted. The summary that was disclosed to my defence described the burn pattern as consistent with accelerant use and made no mention of the alternative explanation. It made no mention of the electrical fitting concern. It made no mention of the recommendation for further investigation. It presented a partial version of a qualified conclusion as if it were a complete and unqualified one. And my barrister had advised me on the basis of that partial version, and the jury had convicted me on the basis of that partial version, and I had been in a cell for 14 months on the basis of that partial version. I want to be precise about Dr. Marcus. He had not fabricated his findings. His original report was careful, qualified, and professionally appropriate. He had included the caveats because he was a conscientious scientist who understood that forensic evidence operates within a range of probability, not a binary of guilty and innocent. The problem was not the report. The problem was what happened to the report between his desk and my defence team's disclosure bundle. Someone had produced a summary. Someone had decided which 4 pages of the 27 to include. Someone had left out the 3 paragraphs that qualified the central finding. And I do not know, and may never know, whether that omission was deliberate or negligent, because the investigation into how it happened is ongoing, and the person responsible has not been identified in any document I have been shown. What I know is the outcome. The midpoint of this story is a Tuesday afternoon in November, when a solicitor called Rachel, my appeal solicitor, methodical and ferociously focused, called me on the prison phone and told me she had the full report. She had obtained it through an application under the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act 1996, which requires the prosecution to disclose all material that might reasonably assist the defence. The application had taken 4 months. The material had been provided in response to a formal order. Rachel had read it over a weekend. She called me on the Tuesday. She said, "There are 3 paragraphs in here that your trial barrister never saw." 3 paragraphs. The appeal was heard in the Court of Appeal 6 weeks later. The prosecution, presented with Rachel's grounds, did not oppose the appeal. Their position, communicated through a letter that arrived 48 hours before the hearing, was that they accepted the original disclosure had been incomplete and that they would not seek to sustain the conviction. The Lord Justice of Appeal described the omission as a serious failure of the disclosure process and quashed the conviction. Unexpected acquittal, that is the legal term. I was standing in a courtroom when it was said, and the word I remember most clearly, from that moment is not acquittal, it is unexpected, because it implies that what had happened before was the expected outcome, and what had been expected was 14 months in a cell, for something I did not do. The counter-lawsuit was filed the following month. Rachel advised me I had a strong civil claim for wrongful prosecution on the basis of the disclosure failure. I instructed her to file it. The claim is against the Crown Prosecution Service and against the investigating force. It is active. I have been told it will take time. Here is the twist. 2 months after the appeal, the electrical installation in my former house was inspected. The house had been rebuilt and was now occupied by new owners who had commissioned a survey. The survey found a fault in the hallway wiring, consistent with the specific product recall Dr. Marcus had referenced in the 3 missing paragraphs. The fault had been present throughout. It was not the cause of the fire in the sense that the relevant component had been destroyed in the fire, but it established beyond doubt that the alternative explanation Dr. Marcus had flagged was not theoretical. It was present in that house. It had been there all along. The detective who had led the investigation has retired. He was not disciplined. The summary was produced by his team. Whether he saw it before it was disclosed is a question the ongoing investigation is attempting to answer. I have not been told the answer. 14 months, 8 feet by 6, a brick wall outside a window, 3 paragraphs that were always there. What do you do with 14 months that should not have happened? I am trying to find out. Some days I think the counter-lawsuit is the answer. Some days I think there is no answer that fits the question. I keep going because stopping would mean accepting that what happened to me was acceptable, and it was not acceptable, and I am not willing to accept it. The report is framed on my wall, all 27 pages, including the 3.